actor, an athlete, a comedian, and a pioneer. Those are just a few of the things that I think of when I hear the name of our next speaker. His name is Henry Holden. He is an incredible motivational agent of change. He is also the founder of Performers with Disabilities for the Screen Actors Guild, and he just appeared on the CBS TV hit show Becker with Ted Danson. I got the pictures in my briefcase to prove it. Afflicted with polio as a child, Henry made up his mind early on that the only disabilities are our attitudes about disabilities. His program, appropriately entitled Attitudes of the Real Disability, has been seen on college campuses across the country, and he is now taking his work to the corporate arena. Henry knows no boundaries. Henry's workshops help HR professionals understand the need to educate and provide for full inclusion. He's working with the advertising industry, public relations professionals, marketing executives, teaching them also how to integrate people with disabilities into their programs. He might, for instance, go onto a TV set, and much like a doctor may go onto the HR set to teach them the right way to, cut open someone's chest, Henry is going to do the same to help people understand the appropriate way. He's also working with the media, and he's talking about how the media needs to be more responsible to project positive, proactive, healthy images of people with disabilities, and he'll talk to you a lot about that today. Henry joined us all the way from New Jersey. I'm so grateful that he came here. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Henry Holden.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. First of all, I should say, I guess the reason I'm here today is because when I was 4 years old, I was fortunate enough to contract polio. You might be thinking, am I hearing this right? Is the loudspeakers working here correctly? Here's this gentleman on crutches, a leg brace, and he's fortunate to have contracted a disability. And the reason I say that is because it hasn't stopped me from quality of life. Many times there is the assumption that if you're a disability, you can't have quality of life. You cannot have quality of life. You're looking at someone who's ridden at the National Horse Show at Madison Square Garden. I'm a certified scuba diver. I learned how to ski in Winter Park, Colorado. I have skis on the bottom of my legs and skis on the bottom of crutches called outriggers, and I'm going down that hill. I don't know, it always goes better when I go down the hill this way. Bowled a 196 in a bowling league, played wheelchair basketball, and I did the LA Marathon. Some of the television shows I've appeared on are Hill Street Blues, T.J. Hooker, Aftermath, Knots Landing, WIOU, Divorce Court. People say you are in divorce court? I thought it was real. Well, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever seen anybody get divorced in 27 minutes? Now, we're going to go into a presentation entitled The Misconceptions Continue, how media represents people with disabilities. Because where do we get our images towards people with disabilities? If it's not from someone in our family or friends, it's from the media. And the first slide we're going to go into, I'll have to put that on. Okay. All right. The first slide, well, before we go into the first slide, this is my logo. A lot of times I'll ask the audience, when I say disabled or handicapped, what are some of the terms that come to your mind? And this is just a sample recently that I've asked students, my audience, and I'll say pain, trapped, lonely, underdeveloped, hardship, not normal, unfortunate, unable, sympathy, very negative terminologies. Ironically, a lot of this terminology came from a class that's going to teach people with disabilities. Now, if you have this connotation towards people you're going to work with, how effective can you be? How effective can you be? I had the pleasure 6 years ago of hosting the ADA rally in New York City. I was the master of ceremonies. We marched from 42nd Street and Madison Avenue all the way down to 23rd Street and Madison Avenue. New York Times, which is supposedly the paper of record, did not have an article. However, they had this image. And when you look at this image, ask yourself, does this represent a rally of 2,000 people? A rally is positive, active? Can everybody see this? Maybe we need to dim the lights a little bit. Would that be all right?
Light dimmingly.
Light dimmingly. Okay, can we see this? No? All right, so we have to dim it a little bit more. Ah, perfect, perfect. Okay, we can all see that now, correct?
Yes.
Does this represent the rally of 2,000 people?
No.
Active, passive, what do you see when you see this? Pitiful. So how can I blame the American public or the corporate world for their negative attitudes towards people with disabilities if those are the images that are coming out there? Now, naturally, I was upset about this particular image, and I wrote a letter to the New York Times. And I'd like to share their response to me. It goes, it seems to me that our coverage of it was about right. We tend not to cover such stage events as marches and demonstrations. Well, that's a lie, because 2 months later, they covered an anti-Jerry Lewis demonstration. So the New York Times, paper of record, does lie. They continue. That certainly does not mean that we do not cover the subjects and causes the people are marching for or against. That we did not cover this march does not mean we are ignoring the disabled. We cover extensively the problems of the disabled. So what does that mean? Anytime there's going to be an article in the New York Times, it's going to be about a what? A problem dealing with disability. Now, you have a lot of people in the workforce. And by the way, the disabled population has a buying power of over $1 trillion. $1 trillion. There are people with disabilities. Unfortunately, unemployment is very high. 71% of people with disabilities are unemployed. Matter of fact, since the ADA has been passed, unemployment has risen from 68 to 71%. Why is that? Well, if the American public were seeing images like this towards people with disabilities, then why would you want to bring them in the workforce? Now here we have, a year prior, this is of the ADA rally, and you can see marches, shouting, demonstrations. And this is the proper way of covering a demonstration. Now here I want to focus to the top picture. It says, Governor Wallace faces death without regret. Governor Wallace recently passed away. Governor Wallace ran for the presidency. There was an assassination attempt on his life, and he became disabled, and he uses a wheelchair. Notice I say he uses a wheelchair. I don't say wheelchair bound. I don't say confined to a wheelchair. I jokingly say nobody's bound to a wheelchair. Nobody has sex in a wheelchair, unless they're kinky. So we have Governor Wallace faces death without regret. This is about death, this article. Now, I would not take any exception if it showed Governor Wallace sitting in this wheelchair. This article's about death. People look at those headlines, death, they see a wheelchair. So naturally, they assume people with disabilities are very sickly, they're going to die any minute. So that's why it's very important in the business world to go through these misconceptions. Here we have birth injuries, cerebral palsy. We have a young girl in a wheelchair. Does that wheelchair fit her? Too big, right? Which makes her look smaller, which makes her look how? Frail. Okay. Now, this is a firm, a law firm saying if your child has a disability, we'll sue. We'll sue. So they are manipulating the American public. But this is one way of showing people with disabilities. Here we have this young girl. Wheelchair fits her, right? She's happy. Here we have another picture of a young girl with forearm crutches, playing with her friend, very happy. Ah, very positive. Now that we have Barbie, Barbie has a friend who uses a wheelchair. Very, very positive, because children need to see role models. We have an obligation in the workforce to show role models. If we're in an advertising campaign, we have an obligation to show adults and youngsters being portrayed with disabilities. We're out there. We are out there. 54 million people with disabilities are in this country. However, I'm sorry to say, you can't get into the dollhouse. It's not accessible. Well, we'll have to work on that. Now, here we have two disabled vets with the American flag behind them. I'm very patriotic. Before I continue, in the last week, by show of hands, how many times have we seen an image of someone with a visible disability? I know there are hidden disabilities, but with a show of hands, in the last week, raise your hand if you saw articles, pictures of someone with a visible disability. Okay, we have 2, 3. How about in the last month? All right, 2 more people, 3 more. How about in the last 6 months? A couple of more people. And how about in the last year? Okay, still half, or maybe 40% of the people didn't raise their hand. Now, I'm also a stand-up comic. I have a comedy show called God Walks on Crutches. Now, the way I got that story, or that title, I was coming out of a post office in Los Angeles, and as I was getting out of the post office, the gentleman held the door open for me, and I said, "Thank you." And as I got to my car, I overheard him say to this woman, referring to me, he said, "You see something like that, you say, 'Thank God.'" So I went over to him and I said, "You're welcome." Yeah, to me, God walks on crutches. Maybe he doesn't have as nice as crutches as, excuse me, maybe she doesn't have. So anyway, I believe people with disabilities, we should be in all form, whatever society has to have. Matter of fact, I joined the Marines, but I lasted only one day. I think I took it a little too seriously. What happened was, Sergeant yelled, "Holden, what's the proper position of attention?" I replied, "Sergeant, the proper position of attention is head erect, back straight, feet at 45-degree angles, crutches along the seams of my trousers, sir!" I knocked him out. Now, when we see this picture, is it an active picture or a passive picture? Passive. So again, if we're only going to see such paucity of images, and if these are the images we're going to see by and large, then we're going to have these type of attitudes towards people with disabilities. Now, another way media portrays people with disabilities as objects. Where's the head of the person, right? Where is the person who's using the wheelchair? Now, I monitor my local papers, travel all over the country, and there was an excellent article about a woman who uses a wheelchair. Excellent article, but I took exception to one sentence in that article. And I go, "I find that the beginning of the 8th paragraph extremely offensive. Mr. Braun states that Marianne doesn't look right in a wheelchair, not that anyone does." Marianne doesn't look right in a wheelchair, not that anyone does. You know, role models. Can you imagine children reading that article? What kind of image are they going to have of themselves? So I sent them a 2-page letter. They responded with one sentence. And it says, "With all respect, I think you're being too sensitive about one sentence in a column that you must agree was compassionate and inspiring." I don't know, where's the compassion? Marianne uses a wheelchair, no one looks good in a wheelchair. There's really no reason to feel sorry for somebody with a disability. It doesn't help the person with the disability, and it doesn't help the other person without the disability. Ironically, 2 months later, in a publication that's geared specifically for people with disabilities, this image appeared.